Welcome to the second module of the Gender Responsive Policy Analysis course. This module, Gender Responsive Policy Analysis, is the second module in the Gender Responsive Economic Policy Management in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. It's a virtual course, part of the courses that we shall be offering under this whole gender responsive economic policy management in the context of COVID-19 pandemic virtual course. So thank you once again. This is going to be a quick summary. It's not a huge and long presentation. We shall do it in under 20 minutes to just make sure that you get a quick grasp of the issues in this course. And we will be able to speak more when we meet in the live sessions, but also we shall have materials to help you through the work that you need to do in these modules. Now, module 2 is the module on gender responsive policy analysis. This module has 3 broad objectives. One is to synthesize the separate insights that are acquired during the course in relation to economics, gender relations, and economic development strategies, sectoral issues, implementation of public policies, and all the array of things that we shall be covering. Now, the second part of this module, the objective is to review and systematize the insights of gender-aware policy analysis to be developed during the various components of this course. Now, the third is to test your ability as participants throughout this course to use the insights on gender-aware policy analysis so that you can structure the development of gender-aware policy briefs, starting from intensive group discussions where we can, maybe online, we shall try and do that, as well as sectoral gender-aware sectoral policy briefs that you will be framing using the particular experience and expertise that you have come into this course. Now, the policy briefs, we hope, shall get a chance to have those presented on the second last day. Maybe each one of you can do a recording of those so we can quickly have a look and see how that will work out. So the expected outcomes is really for you to see how to understand how to use economic policy analysis with gender-aware gender concepts, but also to demonstrate your ability to synthesize policy insights in all the course modules, but also foresee your ability to use those insights to structure an actual policy brief. Because since you are all policy makers or you are people that interact with policy, it's important that you get a good grasp of how you can use these different skills to actually structure a short policy brief. Now, economic policy analysis. We know that when we talk about economic policy, it is undertaken to alter the behavior of individual consumers, households, communities, or farms in a way in which their behavior is coordinated to take part in an economic activity. So when we do economic policy analysis, that's the backbone of what we are trying to achieve, which is to say, how can we see a way in which people respond differently to some of the economic policies that are in place. Now, this can involve different things, but largely it involves changing the terms and conditions by which markets and non-market institutions operate, which has a consequence for individual, household, community well-being, as well as the overall human security of the individual. Now, economic policy analysis also examines and assesses the effects of individual, household, community, and farm and government behavior on people's well-being. So therefore, economic policy analysis requires a number of things to be in place. One is one needs to specify the objectives for the intervention that is being introduced into society, particularly asking the question, what is that intervention equitable? Is that intervention efficient? Those are two very important aspects. So examining the methods used to achieve the objectives within the constraints of available resources or technology is also another thing that we do in economic policy analysis. Now, what are the instruments used? The instruments of economic policy are, one, they are those which are about evaluating whether the policy methods or instruments can achieve or have achieved the objectives, usually through what we call economic cost-benefit analysis. The other is assessing whether the objectives were appropriate, often using the standard axioms of welfare economics, and particularly asking whether one person can be better off without making any other person worse off. That's usually the standard test in economic policy analysis. So what does economic policy analysis do? In a summarized way, we could say that economic policy analysis examines the effects of policy changes, prices, supply and demand that bring about changes in prices, state budgets, trade positions, welfare of producers and consumers, whether be individuals, households, or communities, the institutional setting that affects economic decision-making. And these are some of the things that economic policy analysis does. And now, in terms of instruments, we said there are two types of instruments that are critical. One is those that try to augment, to strengthen, to work with, and through the markets. So those are the ones that augment the market. But then there are also those that methods that try to bypass the market. They go around the markets. So in a sense, when you are looking at economic policy analysis, you will realize that most policies are trying to do one of those two. For example, taxes and subsidies, direct interventions into an economy, trade policy, exchange rate policy. All these are key instruments for economic policy. Now, in general, policies that operate with or through the markets are often, but not always, more likely to achieve their goals than those that try to control the markets. Now, policies that affect prices are usually much more complex and may have complex side effects than those which don't try to affect prices. As you know, in any country, when you hear a policy that is taking a direct intervention at the level of the price, usually you will have differences in terms of impact. Now, economic policy is developed by the state, which is a social institution. In turn, it also affects institutions like households, like markets, like communities, like states. So that's important for us to have in the back of our mind. especially when we are coming to this discussion from a gender-aware perspective. Because from a gender-aware perspective, we have to understand that the heart of all gender analysis is to understand how does society and societal relations get configured by economic interventions. Now, in considering the objectives of economic policy, gender-aware price and institutional distortions in the operation of the economy may be addressed. Now, in choosing the methods and instruments of economic policy, there may be what we call gender-based constraints to resource and technology availability. So the instruments of economic policy may themselves be gender-balanced. So it's important that gender relations, it should be understood that gender relations can strongly affect the capacity of economic policy interventions to achieve their efficiency or equity objectives, because there is a differential impact of any economic policy on women and men. Now, in terms of the key concepts that we usually interact with when we talk about economic policy analysis from a gender perspective, we'll be talking about things like gender-blind policies, gender-neutral policies, gender-responsive policies, and also gender mainstreaming. Now, when you talk about gender-blind policies, we are usually talking about economic or social policies that ignore the different situations or roles and needs and interests of women and men and girls and boys. When we talk about gender-neutral policy, then we are referring to policies that is not affected by and does not affect the different situations, roles, needs, and interests of women, men, girls, and boys. And in reality, there are very few gender-neutral policies. And when policymakers claim that the policy is gender-neutral, usually what they are saying is that it's actually gender-blind. If we are having a discussion, and when we have a discussion, we shall be touching on what does that actually mean in practice. Now, when we talk about gender-responsive policy, what we are talking about is gender-responsive economic and social policy is a policy that considers and addresses the different situations and roles and needs and interests of women, of men, of boys, and girls. And the term gender-sensitive can be used rather than gender responsive, as they have the same meaning, but that's what we mean. And so when we say gender responsive or gender sensitive, we are saying that this policy must be addressing the different situations of all men, all women, in their different diversities. Now, when we talk about gender mainstreaming, now this is another very important term, because when we talk about gender mainstreaming, this is a process. And it's a process of assessing the implications for women and men on any planned action, be it legislation, a policy, a program, and at all levels. Macro, micro, household, community, all levels. But it's also a strategy of making women as well as men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension of the design, the implementation, monitoring, evaluation of policies and programs for all political, economic, social spheres, so that in terms of benefit, both women and men can benefit. Gender mainstreaming should therefore be applied to economic policy analysis, in which the ultimate goal is to achieve gender equality. Now, when we go through this course and talk about the different dimensions of this course, some of the issues that we shall be dealing with will be issues of policy. And policy briefs become an important instrument because, as you know, policymakers everywhere in governments need well-argued positions in order for them to make decisions. So a quick and a good policy brief has got a number of things that are important. And some of the guidelines of a gender-aware policy brief are the following. One, as I've said, policymakers want policy briefs that justify what they are doing. The policy brief should be written in non-technical language for interested readers, especially policymakers with an academic background, that they all don't have to understand every concept that is there in the economics, or all the empirical nuances. If you are a statistician, you don't have to put in all the standard deviations and other things, and you know, so you have to remove all that from the policy brief, because policy briefs should present only policy relevant aspects, focusing on those research results arising from whatever paper you have analyzed. Now, the main task of presenting the policy brief for us here will be to focus the attention of the reader and the policy on the policy relevance of the intervention that is being analyzed from the gender perspective. Now, before writing a policy brief, it's important to try and summarize the results of the group paper, if you are doing it as a group, in terms of the relevance of the policy, the key question that is being addressed, the major quantitative and qualitative, descriptive and analytical results obtained from the paper, and the interpretation of the results in relation to the policy issue of interest to policymakers. Now, this summary can be useful in writing the policy brief. Some general rules when writing a policy brief. One is a policy brief should focus on one major message per brief. You don't need too many messages in one policy brief. And again, it's important that you do not try to explain the methods used in the paper that you are analyzing in the policy brief, but rather keep it very short, because most readers may not be interested in all that detail. What they would be interested in would be really to focus on the brief itself and the key message that you are bringing across. Also, to not just present results of the analysis, but try to interpret the factors that cause the results. Because again, if one needs to look at the results of the analysis, you can quickly go back to the full paper. So your policy brief should really be adding value, and the value add is an interpretation of the factors that caused the results that you are presenting or sharing, and the message that you're sharing in the policy brief. So such new insights may be very interesting for the policy maker. That is, when you have taken the results and interpreted the factors that may have caused them, that is what makes the policy brief interesting. In a policy brief, usually it's always good to use one diagram, one graph, one table per brief, or diagram, so that it's easier to take in. And also to make sure that the diagram, the graph, or whatever you use is a pictorial, is if it is included, you make use of it. Don't just put it there and don't talk about it at all. At least say something. It's always important and good to have an attractive design. As you know, many people would like to read things that are accessible. If something is so crowded, they may not have that interest. But also to keep the policy briefs on two sides of an A4 paper. I mean, if you are thinking about length, maybe if I flip one paper, it's better than having a brief of 20 pages because that will not be a brief anymore. So what are the components of a policy brief? These are some of the indicative components. A policy brief always should have a title that should attract the reader's attention, because when you have a good title, you are able to quickly look and say, oh, this is interesting. So it's important that the policy brief has a title. The first paragraph should always provide a general background and information that defines the problem. And in so doing, it justifies further examination of that specific policy intervention. The second paragraph should really contain a question that is being answered in such a way as to throw light on a specific policy intervention identified in the first brief. Now, the third paragraph should provide any contextual or empirical considerations that throw light upon the question. It is at this stage that a specific policy instrument can be introduced. This paragraph must be very efficient, efficiently linked to the question of the policy brief, but also of the policy brief, and back to the wider theoretical and empirical issues in a way so that you have all that tied up together. And really, as a maximum 6 sentences, non-technical language is a good length. The fourth paragraph should really provide the results of the analysis, usually illustrated by a diagram, a graph, a small table, something like that, and provide only the briefest information, maybe one sentence, on the approach used, and provide non-methodological details. You need to avoid using jargon so that you can maximize readership, and do not present results that are not directly relevant to the question. Now, the fifth paragraph should answer the question asked in the second paragraph. It is feasible to try and interpret the factors that cause the results presented in the fourth paragraph. But so it's important to do that. In the sixth paragraph, you should describe the policy relevance of the gender-aware policy analysis, along with the key recommendations that arise from the answer to the question. Reference to the growth, distribution, welfare effects of a policy in light of government objectives and the scope of the first and second best policies, that kind of thing, can be examined. And the following, the sixth paragraph, would be a brief. The brief may provide a short guide on further reading, or provide a minimal reference, just so that somebody who wants to, go a little bit deeper has somewhere they can go and say, oh, let's get to know what this is about. Again, the quick tips here. Number one, focus quickly on the central decision criterion or criteria of the problem. Avoid the toolbox approach to analyzing policy. Use the simplest appropriate method. Learn to deal with uncertainty. Say it with numbers where possible. Make the analysis simple and transparent. Check the facts. And it's important to develop a healthy skepticism for widely held beliefs and established facts in matters of public policy. So don't read everything and say, this is okay. Always look back and say, what is it that I'm being told? learn to advocate for positions of others also, give the analysis, not the decisions, because a policy brief usually goes to the policy maker who will make the decision. So yours is to give the analysis. Push the boundaries of analysis beyond the policy envelope. Sometimes it's good to look what else can I say about this matter that can also interest the policy maker. And be aware that there is no such thing as an absolutely correct, rational, or complete analysis. So don't try to be the most efficient, complete, analytical person when you are doing a policy brief. Know that there will always be other positions, so long as you give a good sense, that is all, and that's important. Now, when we go to the actual course itself, we will be introducing the way, the exercise that you shall be doing as part of this course. But for now, I think this gives you a few highlights about what this course is all about. What I would like you to take away from this is that this is going to be a course that is foundational, but that will be then also be used to help you to appreciate and understand how the different facets of policy work when we are talking about policy from a gender-aware perspective. With that, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next course.